Seven words, seven concepts that we've been talking about that'll change your family. 7 ideas that will help us to have stronger families. Forgiveness. Forgiveness is a tough topic, isn't it? But it's important. Blessing the younger folks in our lives. Honoring those who maybe passed us a few years. Truth. Now, remember when we talked about truth, not just propositions, but truth that drives us to live differently. Truth that pushes us to action. When these become embedded in a family, and whatever your family looks like, the family starts to become healthier. Today, well, we'll get to that in just a minute. I don't often do this, but I've gotten hooked on a TV show. It's called Alone. And if anyone has seen this, yeah, there's a couple of you who's like, yeah, I've seen that. Basically, it's this, that one person gets to choose a couple items, like a roll of fishing line and perhaps a fire starter and just a couple things, and they go out into the worst spots, and they're left with nothing other than a camera. And they've got to see how long they can last. And it's funny, one guy is talking about how tough he is, and, hey, there's bears in this area. He goes, bear better watch out for me. 6 hours in, he runs into something that a bear left in the woods, and he's calling for help. This ain't worth all that, and he's got to get out. And, different people have different gifts, so those giftedness or lack thereof allow them to thrive or to wane off pretty quickly. And I think the longest someone's lasted is 87 days. But folks either almost starve and have to be taken out, they're injured and they don't have a support system around them, so they have to be taken out, or frankly, just not being around people is hard. Not having relational connections becomes so difficult that they have to be pulled out. And I mention that because I think that there's been times in my life, I know, where I've approached my spiritual life the same way. I'm going to go with this alone. This is up to me. I have to do this, and it becomes something inward. And the reality is I see lots of folks do this too, either families or individuals. They don't open up to the church that God has placed around them, to the community that God has placed around them, and sooner or later, those same things start to attack, and either the hurts of life pull them away, or a lack of relational connection pulls them away, or frankly, they just don't have the gifts to hang in there, and they fade off. God didn't design this spiritual life to work that way. We're communal beings. We're supposed to be in fellowship. So today, the word that will change, strengthen your family is church. And as we dig into that, and I'll ask you to go on ahead and open to Matthew chapter 16 if you've got your Bible with you. Open or flip it on, whatever. If you've got the old paper Bible or some kind of space-age gadget, either way. Matthew 16. We're going to step into a behind-the-scenes conversation that you may not think has to do with us at church, but I promise you it does. It changes everything. This conversation happens at a little town. We're 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee now. And you leave behind kind of those visions you have of Israel. Maybe it's a lot of stone and desert and all of that. Now we're into rolling hills. It's green. It's beautiful. This is the areas where the headwaters of the Jordan. This is where the Jordan starts. As a matter of fact, this is what it looks like there. It's pretty lovely. The town was built by Herod's son, a guy by the name of Philip. And he built this town on an ancient pagan town. He wanted to make it in honor of Caesar, but he wanted everyone to know that he footed the bill, so it's called Caesarea Philippi. That's where this comes from. And it's a wide mix of people that live in this little town. There are some that are and I don't use the term in a crass way, but they're pagans. That's the lifestyle that they live. And matter of fact, this picture here is this picture behind the town. There's this huge rock edifice. It's just huge, and there's this great big hole right here. And back, long time ago, they would offer sacrifices into that hole. Their springs came up out of there. Matter of fact, the spring that I showed a minute ago originally came out of that, and they would offer sacrifices into there. And they called it this. It's called the gates of hell. That's where they would offer their sacrifices. Now, the Romans didn't want to let this huge altar place, because they had to show that they were more powerful. So what they did was they built now a temple to Caesar right next to it, because Caesar would be more powerful than the gates of hell in the pagan religion. So you have this mix of folks. There are these religious Jews who are waiting for God to send his Messiah. You have pagans. You have government worship going on. And here, Jesus has an incredibly important behind-the-scenes conversation. This isn't in a sermon, but it gives us direction. And honestly, in modern New Testament scholarship, this is one of the most discussed passages. So Matthew chapter 16. I'm going to start in verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But you," he asked him, "who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus responded, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. The gates of Hades, or the gates of hell, depending on what translation we read, they won't overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And then he gave the disciples orders to not tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Remember, early on in his ministry, he said, "You got to keep quiet about this for right now." He said, this is one of those scenes that I hope is sort of on, I don't know if they have DVRs in heaven. I don't even know if DVRs are still a thing, but I hope to be able to see that. Because Jesus looks around and he can see decent folks who are enraged by the government, and they're waiting and hoping for God to send an answer. Other folks who flat out worship the government. And then there's also pagans who are living there. And when I wrote this down, I was like, hang on, are we talking about Indiana or Caesarea Philippi? Because there's some pretty strong parallels there. And in that, Jesus asked the disciples this really insightful question. He says, "What's the word on the street? Who do people say that I am?" The Son of Man, he's referring to himself. "Who do people say that I am?" Some say John the Baptist. Others say, well, maybe he's Elijah, who Elijah was kind of he was the prophet that was thought highest of. Or maybe Jeremiah, who was considered to be the first of the latter prophets. Jesus sort of cuts it off there. But you, there's a contrast here. But you, doesn't really matter what they're saying, though. I want to know, what do you say? Who do you say that I am? Honestly, that may be the most important question ever asked. Of course, Peter responds. Of all the times we give Peter a hard time, he gets it right here. He nails this. You're the Messiah. And in other words, you're the one that God's doing all his work through. You're the one we've been waiting on. You're the Messiah. Jesus says, Peter, you got it. You're blessed. You get this. Because that confession didn't even come from you. That confession has a divine origin in itself. In other words, your heart is aligned with the power behind everything. So he's let you know. He's peeled back the calluses and let you know that I'm the one to trust. He says, on this rock. The rock. Now, make sure you get this. Peter's not the rock. On this rock, the confession that Jesus is Lord. On that confession, he says, I'll build my church. And this is the first time that Jesus ever uses that term, church. But, if you go through the New Testament, it's going to show up like 100 more times. But this is the beginning. Jesus says, I'm going to build a church. Now, not a building, although we use buildings, but not a building. It's a people. It's individuals who have come to make that same confession. It's an embassy. If you've ever been to another country, there's always a U.S. embassy there, right? And when you go to the U.S. embassy, what you're doing is that regardless of where you are, you're stepping onto U.S. soil. And regardless of what's happening out there, there's folks that speak your language. There's folks that have the same agenda. That's what an embassy is. It's a little bit of home, regardless of where you are. A church is designed to be a little bit of heaven right here, right where we are. It's an embassy of the kingdom. So it's not just a people, but it's a people gathered, and it's a place of justice. It's a place where we stand up for what's right. We don't just sweep things under the rug. It's a place of mercy. It's a place of walking humbly because we know that we don't deserve. We haven't earned this. It's a gift of God. It's a place of grace. It's a place where, how does Jesus put it? On earth as it is in heaven. That is what the church is about. And when he looks at that, he says the gates of hell aren't even going to stand up to this. The gates of hell, when you look back and you see the pagan worship and the Roman worship and everything that was happening there, think of just the gall of someone to stand in the middle of that and just say, none of this will stand up to what I'm about to build. None of this is going to stand up to the church. Now, as much as I love the military metaphors of the New Testament, and there's a lot of them. Paul says, he's a good soldier for Christ. That shows up over and over and over again. This is not a military metaphor. Jesus simply stands in the middle of the mess of life. Pagan worship, Roman worship, all of that, and he says, none of this stands up to what I'm about to do. None of this is going to stand up to the church. Now, I get what someone's thinking. What in the world does this have to do with families? Everything. Everything. Because here in this statement, he lets us into his intentions. In other words, the heart of the Godhead, what God is going to do on earth. Jesus is letting us in on this. Notice this is the first time that he mentions church, but everything after this, Acts is the beginning of the church. It's the record of the birth of the church. The letters are written thereafter to the church. We end in Revelation, which is a call to the church to suffer during hard times, because what he's saying is, you hang in there, I win in the end. When he says this, it's not a lie. So our families are best and healthiest when we align with the intentions and work of God. When our families are invested in what he's doing. And think about this, any business, any team, any military unit works better when everyone has the same agenda, when everyone has the same goal. You can't have people going in different directions and expect to get anything done. Here, God's intention is to build a church. Too much of my life has been spent trying to do this on my own. Here we find out that God's doing something with a people together. See, families function best aligned with the work of Jesus. Scott McKnight he's a New Testament scholar. He's got a book about the church. He calls it a fellowship of difference. Like each one of us is different. And the analogy he uses is a salad. So if you take a salad, it's got all the different components. You know, it's got lettuce. And then if it's me making a salad, it's got lettuce and cheese and bacon and hamburger and ham. And then a lot of dressing. And my wife is like, that's not a salad. I'm going, no, that's the only edible salad. But if you think about a salad, if you pull it apart, you got lettuce. What's lettuce on its own? It's garbage, right? But combined with something else together, each part brings something special. Each part brings something that's designed to make the whole better. It's a fellowship of difference. And our families function better when we experience this reality, when our families are placed in the middle of a fellowship of difference. Together, we experience oneness with other genders and socioeconomic groups and different races and different music styles. See, in the church, there's each one of us, we don't all become the same, for goodness sakes, but there's someone, not something, but someone greater who binds us together and makes us better as a whole. And together, we learn to honor the aged and to value life and to honor different marital statuses. Together, we witness service and humility and justice. Together, we experience community. Together, we worship and pray, and we experience table fellowship. That's why, and I haven't said this in a while, and I feel like I need to get back to it. No one should be taking communion alone. It's antithetical to the gospel. You see someone sitting alone, go sit by them. Go sit by them. Together, we center around God's Word. Together, we're filled with the Holy Spirit. Together, we prioritize holiness and virtue. And together, we become something different. C.S. Lewis, the guy that wrote Chronicles of Narnia and Mere Christianity, he was awesome. But he was a Oxford Don. So a Don, that's kind of the highest level professor. And frankly, he was pretty uppity. It's just who he was. When he became a Christian, he hated the singing. He called it fourth-rate poetry set to fifth-rate music. And he was like, I just don't even like it. But over time, he came to understand that it's not about the music. Here's people from all different backgrounds and all different capabilities bound together for a purpose. It's the church. That's our families function best and are strongest when those realities are experienced and lived out. And it becomes reciprocal in every direction. In other words, it's vertical in nature, right? Because we don't worship each other. We worship God. We're not here for performances. We're not here to hear the worship band, no matter how good they may be. We're here for God. But also, that plays out this way as well, because in churches where we learn to serve one another and submit to one another and to love one another. But it's not only that, because it goes downward as well, because it teaches the young folks in our lives that this is who we are and this is what we do. It has an all-encompassing effect around us. It can't be overplayed how important this is. And too often, forgive me when I go here for a second, too often we dumb all that down to, well, here's where I go, or I like this preacher, or they've got a great music. Holy cow. The reality of church is so much more. The reality of a people that calls one another to holiness is so much more. The reality of being loved regardless. So much more. What may possibly be worse than that is when you hear this, well, I've got Jesus, I don't need the church. Forgive me for being blunt, but there is no biblical model to support that. Not one. Even John, who was in exile on an island, even stayed connected with the local churches. I mean, he had to do it via letters, but he had to be connected because we're people of the same hope and the same agenda, the same God, the same Holy Spirit, the same end destination. So that just doesn't jive. We are strongest when we're together. We're better together. Now, don't get me wrong, because I know what someone's going to say. Well, I'm getting legalistic about being. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Not at all. I get the realities of life, but what I am saying is that church should be part of the fabric of the life of the Christian. Should be part of the fabric of the life of the Christian. That's why the author to the Hebrews, chapter 10, and let us encourage one another in order to provoke love and good works, not neglecting to gather together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Families function best aligned with this, but it also, families function best aligned with the mission of Jesus. Remember, Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell won't overpower it. The expansion of the kingdom via the expansion of the church is God's plan. Here, when you're God, you don't have to have a plan B. This is the way he works. The kingdom goes out via the church. So many times, we become so focused on the end of the dying and going to heaven that we've forgotten about the on earth as it is in heaven. We've forgotten that our task is to live in little embassies, to grow that embassy, to make the reality of what we believe there seen here. That's part of it. This means that the church is more but not less than a Sunday gathering. And when our families get aligned with the work of Jesus, the mission of Jesus, it's not alone. What happens is we're drawn up into a greater work. We're drawn up into what he's doing. That means that all of our lives become a part of what Jesus is building. Church isn't relegated to Sunday morning. That is an unhealthy church. And our homes become opportunities for God's work. Now, what I don't mean is this, is that you invite your neighbors over and beat them on the head with a Bible until they submit or die. There's a gal by the name of Rosaria Butterfield. She was a tenured professor at Syracuse, a literature professor. She wrote a scathing review. She lived a lifestyle that was very anti-gospel. She wrote a scathing review of Christians in the New York Times. There was a local pastor that just wrote her a letter, said, love to have you over for dinner. Invited her to his home with him and his family every Wednesday for a year. Just kept inviting her over. Hey, I just want to get to know you. I just want to know you. I just want to show you that we might not be as different. Today, she's married to a pastor. That's one of the reasons why when we talk about small groups now, we're talking about we want to do this a little different because our homes become opportunities for the gospel. As a matter of fact, Butterfield's written a book called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. It's time that the church take hospitality serious again, to open our homes and just say, hey, why don't you come on over? And I get that people say, I don't know, man, I'm not real good at talking about this or that. How about we just show them we're not weird for starters? I mean, legit. How about we just show people that we're regular folks? We eat like regular folks. We watch TV and play board games. We root for sports teams. We're regular folks. How about we start there? One thing that I am convinced of is that if we'll be good friends and neighbors, sooner or later we'll have the opportunity to talk about the real stuff. If we invest in lives of other people and just be decent friends, you don't have to have a degree in apologetics. You just got to be a decent human. And sooner or later, we get the opportunity. Hey, man, why is this? Why are you different? Or why is this? Or gosh, we just found out our finances are this. Or work is happening here. Or, man, I just got this diagnosis. And that's that time where we've built the relational equity. When our families start to see that this is a priority for us, all of life becomes part of the mission of God. Where we work, where we live, and where we play. And I'm here to tell you, sports teams, where we're working, I'm not talking about standing on a corner. What I'm talking about is just being a decent friend. When our families get that all of life is called to be in time with Jesus, in His work, our families function better. Last one here is that families function best immersed in the hope of Jesus. Remember what Jesus said, I will build my kingdom, I will build my church. The gates of hell won't prevail against it. In other words, what He's saying is, I win. That's the reality. If you read that, I know how this book ends. He wins. And that means the way that we live as families is different. Our agendas with our kids become different. Our agendas with our relationships become different. As a parent, I'm no longer about behavior management, just making sure that my kids behave a certain way. Although that is important, what my goal is that they will come to know and love Christ because He wins. That's my agenda. See, the church is an end-time community. Now, when I say that, don't get me wrong, we're not going to pass out copies of Left Behind and work through it as a group. When I say we're an end-time community, is we all have the same destination as followers of Jesus. We're waiting on the restoration of all things. That is a reality that will happen. But our work now is to bring a little bit of that into the world today, is to reflect that reality now. Bits and pieces, as the Bible talks about it, like a mirror dimly. There'll be a time when that mirror's not dim. There'll be a time when we see clear, but today, this is how we function as our families and as a church. And that changes the way that we live. We used to, Tracy's family, my wife's family, we used to go to a lot of IndyCar races. And after the 500, I'd always go back and then watch the 500 afterwards. Now, I knew who won, so I didn't have to worry during the middle of the race. So if the driver I was hoping would win fell back or he was a lap down, I never had to get too stressed out about it because I knew how this ended. Church, think about this in our families. We know how the story ends. Jesus wins. So we don't have to experience the roller coaster of the struggles because we know how it's going. We know where this is leading. And in our families, when we model that, we model something that's not reactionary. We model something that's consistent. Any of you all been around an old saint, maybe a grandparent or something, that you just saw, man, the stuff that they lived through, and you just saw this quiet faith. That's that way because they know how the story ends. Imagine if we paint that for our kids and our grandkids in those relationships that are closest to us, that we don't have to do all this all of life because we're aligned with the one who's building a church. We're aligned with the one who wins. That's a hope that nothing else can match. Listen to this text. John, the one that was exiled but still stayed connected with the church, gives this vision. He said, "Then I saw a new heaven, new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." The sea in Hebrew thought meant fear. There's no more reason to be afraid. I also saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared like a bride adorned for her husband. Then I heard a loud voice from the throne. "Look, God's dwelling is with humanity. He will live with them. They'll be his people. God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. He'll wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Grief, crying, pain will be no more, because the previous things have passed away." And the one seated on the throne said, "Look, I'm making everything new." Right, because these words are faithful and true. I want my family to live in that with a group, because I can't hold them up, but everyone together can. Gosh, I hate when I get emotional. Drives me nuts. I try, and it just comes out. Think about what we're doing here when we talk about families and those close to us. We're driving down anchors and things that think of forgiveness and blessing and hope and church. These are the anchors that help to build our families to where there's something strong and hope-filled. A long time ago, sailors, Navy guy, I've got to come up with a Navy illustration. Sailors used to do something called kedging. So in other words, if you had to go through or into a difficult port or an area where it was dangerous, what they would do is they'd put the anchor in a small boat and drive it out. And you drop that anchor there, and then they'd ratchet the boat forward. And then they'd take that anchor and put it in the boat again and take it out and ratchet it forward again, so that those anchors could bring the boat safely through hard waters. That's what these 7 words do. That's the foundation: forgiveness, blessing, honor, truth, church. They provide anchors that help us as families to learn how to navigate the difficult parts of life. If we try to do this on our own, more often than not, we fail. But together as God's people, we can lift one another up. And what's Jesus say? Anyone who leaves houses or this or that for me gains 100 mothers and 100 fathers and 100 brothers and sisters. That's the church. Becomes a family. That's what I want for my family. That's what I want for this family. If you would, pray with me. God, thank you. Thank you for the gift of church. Thank you that you win. Help us to live like it. Help us to gather like it. Help us to worship like it. In Christ's name, for his church. Amen.